Welcome, guys, to another episode of the Evolution Podcast. Today, I've got a special guest. We're going to be discussing everything finance related, and he has a very interesting background. And you guys are in for a treat. So, Casey, if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm a financial advisor, owner of Wiser Wealth Management here in the Atlanta area. And we have, I guess, a unique client base, and most of them are airline pilots. I was one myself for about 12 years. And I guess, about 30% of our clients are airline pilots. The rest of them are business owners and people that are looking for unbiased financial advice.
Interesting. So, how did you? I've always said. So, how did you get into the? Is it your background as an airline pilot is what allowed you the ability to be able to transition and get a clientele of mostly
Well,
pilots?
yeah, it started a little differently. I grew up in an aviation family, and so I always loved aviation. But I wanted to be in finance. Personal finance was something I kind of discovered while I was in college when I got my finance degree. But I was the finance guy that had posters of Boeing airplanes up on the wall in the dorm room, right? And so I got my first job at a brokerage house down in Atlanta, and it's not what I thought it was going to be. I got there and I got hired to do financial planning, and someone decided that financial planning wasn't driving enough revenue. And next thing you knew, I was forced to sell life insurance and annuities. And I'm like, this is the math doesn't add up for these people. And every transaction I felt kind of sad that I was stuck in this role. And so I had this vision of creating a firm that would be able to work in the best interest of its clients. And so I left, but I was only 23 years old at the time. I did start the shell of what you see today in my company, but I decided to follow my passion for aviation for a bit. And so I ended up flying out of Bar Harbor, Maine to Boston in a little Beech 1900 turboprop for a small airline. And that quickly transitioned into a job with flying for Atlantic Southeast Airlines, which actually doesn't exist today. I think Endeavor Air, which is a regional carrier for Delta, didn't take it over, but kind of took its place. And so my journey in finance was really my passion for finance and aviation. I was able to kind of merge those after a decade or so long in the business. And then 2014, I couldn't keep doing both anymore. There wasn't enough hours in the day. So
Interest. So ASA, right? ASA, Atlantic South, isn't that what, Republic now, or is that Endeavor?
no, what happened was ASA was sold during Delta's bankruptcy for about $200 million to a company called SkyWest. SkyWest, it took ExpressJet from Continental or United and then tried to merge us together, and the unions didn't get along. That didn't go very well. And eventually all the airplanes were transferred to SkyWest, and they shut down ASA and ExpressJet long after I had left the company. So airline business can be a ruthless business at times, but I was there at the best of times. and now the major airlines are healthy again. Cause I started just after September 11th. I mean, it was a tough time.
Airlines weren't paying. I mean, they were after 9/11, after September 11. They weren't paying that much money. I mean, the income of a pilot.
In my podcast, we talk a lot about this a lot, but my first airline job, I think, paid $18 an hour. It cost me more to get to work than I was getting paid.
Isn't that, and that's where you kind of do it for the love of the job. And so if you go from a finance background, and then from the finance background you get into aviation. Okay.
Correct.
Right. It's just so following the story here. So you get into aviation, and now you get into aviation, and then what made you leave? Because you did what, 12 years in the industry? What made you leave?
Yeah. So you got to remember that flying a regional jet is very different from flying for Big Delta, American or United. So the pay scale is very different. And for me to make that transition in 2014, when the jobs at the majors were coming back, I would have had to have left my company for months to go train and go through that training process. And I was just at a point where I couldn't do it. And quite honestly, for me personally, I was trying to decide do I take the easy path or do I take the harder path? It's harder to go build something that isn't really a viable business model. Fee only planning was not a huge thing when I started this. And so for me, it was like, well, I'm going to take the hard road because I feel like there's better reward for my family in the long term. I do like to move around a lot, but I didn't like being gone 15 days out of the month either. And then, for me, I had, cultivated my passion for finance through the Airline Pilots Association. I was on the R&I committee, retirement and insurance committee, and so we worked hard to get low cost funds into the 401k plans. It got near the end. I had to work out a special deal with the company that I didn't have to report to scheduling before I flew. I could just go straight to the airplane. Now that's common. Back then, you couldn't normally do that. You had to go to a computer because there'd be a line of people asking for financial advice.
Interesting. No,
And
that's
so
that's very
I delayed a flight one time because so many people had questions about one particular benefit change, and the chief pilot called me, who was also a client, and it was like, "Hey, what happened here?" He's like, "You
interesting.
need to skip the crew room and go right to the airplane and kind of be more anonymous at work."
That's a very fascinating. That's a very very fascinating experience there, because so now the people who were stopping you, these were mostly
Oh yeah,
employees
yeah.
of
There
ASA
there
at
are
the time.
pilots and flight attendants who knew me personally, and there had been a big change in our 401k plan at the time, and they just had a lot of questions. So we started doing workshops for them, and it was a little bit of Dave Ramsey, which you don't if you don't follow Dave Ramsey, he's the guy that get out of debt, stay out of debt. So we did a little bit of Dave Ramsey with, hey, you got to be good with your money here. And then after that, you can start investing, and this is what the 401k plan is, and this is what it does. And a lot of that helped kind of kickstart what you see today and wiser wealth management.
Interesting. So now, if you had to do it all over again, and you were handed a magic wand, would you go back and stay in the industry and not pursue the finance career and moving forward? Would you just stayed ASA transition, go work for Delta, one of the
It,
carriers?
one of my favorite airplanes is the 757, the Boeing 757. It's a sports car. It's overpowered. It just has a sleek look to it. It's like a pencil with wings. It's
Hmm.
really pretty airplane. And I was riding home yesterday from Jackson Hole, Wyoming, where we went on a little ski trip with our family. And I was sitting on that airplane going, I would have been a senior captain on this thing by now. What would I have done? Would I change anything? And quite honestly, I wouldn't have. Part of it, being a dad changes things too. And for me, I work long hours, but I have flexibility in those hours. And in 2014, my oldest son, who's now 18, was 9. I think he's around 9 years old, and he really wanted to start playing in this junior golf circuit. And they played 9 holes on Saturday mornings at different courses around town, and it's like $50, $80, something like that to sign them up. And you're the caddy. So dad or the mom's the caddy, and the kids play 9 holes. And when they get to around 12 or 11, I think they go to 18 holes. Well, I was a junior captain. I didn't have any weekends off. And so there was no way I could have done
So
that.
the
And,
schedule,
and so for
yeah, the
me,
schedule would have
for
not worked
me,
out.
the schedule wouldn't have worked out. And so by me stopping doing that, it freed up my weekends. And Ethan starts next year at Mississippi State University on the golf team. So I think, hey, you know what? He went to a D1 SEC school, and that's family success there. And then now my daughter, who is the middle child, she's trying to one up him, and she has 3 horses, and she wants to go to the Olympics in eventing. Whether she makes it or not, I have no idea. But she, it's her passion. She's out there 4 hours every day, riding and training.
No, that's good though, but
And
because
so,
from
so for me, it's like, well, if I was an airline pilot, I wouldn't have had that flexibility, or the money.
interesting. So you're saying right now you make more as a financial being in the financial wealth management space as opposed to if you had stayed and pursued a career as an airline pilot.
As the owner of my company, absolutely, yes.
Fascinating, fascinating. Now, do you have your Series six, or are you doing more life annuities, or are you doing more variable product as well?
I don't do any of that. I'm very passionate that those products are really good for the people selling them. They're really good for the company who create them. But no, I'm pretty good at math, and annuities don't add up. Whole life insurance has a purpose, but it should never be your primary investment. It should be a secondary investment. And I've built this firm on the core value of always work in the best interest of the client. Everyone deserves to have a financial guide that doesn't give out a conflict of interest. And so all those products create conflicts of interest because those products pay the advice giver. I believe that the product should never, ever pay the advice giver. The only people that pay us is the client. They pay us directly for either our time or we charge an asset management fee if that's what's in their best interest. And that's one thing. That's something I'm very passionate about right now in the aviation space. Is we have two companies that are trying to take the pilot's 401k plan, which we worked so hard for so many years to get the cost down. The average cost of the 401k plan at Delta Airlines, for example, is around 0.03% per year. And now we have asset managers with pilots making more money than they've ever made. They have asset managers trying to get the pilots to move those to a 401k brokerage link and charge a 0.5%. Well, if you to manage the account, so if you think about the math here, S&P comes out with a report called SPIVA, SPIVA, every 6 months. The SPIVA report shows that the probability of any asset manager beating the S&P 500, the index, over a 20-year period is 2%. There's a 2% chance. There's a 6% chance they beat it over a 10-year period, maybe a 30% chance over a 3-year period. So what that tells me is we don't need to have asset managers adding on large asset management fees. We just need help allocating the funds and letting those funds grow over time. And so that's the difference between financial planning and being an asset manager. I think the asset management job it should be coming to an end because robots can do this now. And so the value in a financial planner is all the other things surrounding the portfolio. If you're a Delta pilot, you get hired, or United or American pilot, you get hired on at age 32. And let's say you retire at 65 and you had someone attaching a 0.5% fee, then you're going to spend over $3 million in fees for investments that probably won't beat the S&P 500, which is crazy to me.
Interesting there. So what's the logic then for the because I'm assuming the negotiations are being done by the pilot because Delta is non-union, right? If I'm
No, they're all represented by ALPA, the airline.
Okay,
policy.
so Delta's ALPA.
But that's another thing that's a little different is that nobody should have to negotiate anything for a 401k plan because the company has a fiduciary duty to deliver a 401k plan that's in the best interest of the participants. And so several years ago, there were many class action lawsuits, not in the airline industry, but in other industries that said, hey, you had this fund, but this fund was cheaper. You should have swapped it out for your employees. And so inside these big 401k plans now, there's lots of index funds available where 20 years ago, even 10 years ago, there really wasn't that case. And so it's nothing that you really have to negotiate. You just have to make the company aware that, hey, these are available and this would be a better option for us. And whether you're union or non-union, the company has the same fiduciary duty.
I'm just thinking more from a perspective of switching over from a more cheaper asset management fee as opposed to switching over to a different 401k plan where you basically because 0.5%, just like you said, a 0.5% with compounded interest is a lot of money over
it's millions of dollars. Yeah, it's millions of dollars. It's over $3 million. For anybody hired now, you can get hired at a major airline in your early 20s or mid 20s. So for those people, it could be $4 million in fees. It's crazy. So what we offer is a flat planning fee. So these families, pilot, non-pilot, doesn't matter, but they'll come in. We charge a flat one-time planning fee, and we help allocate their assets as well as do other things. How much life insurance should you be carrying? We don't sell it, but we can advise on how much you should have, and we can refer you to someone. How much disability should you have? Is your company disability enough? It usually is. Have you done estate planning? If you pass away, will, power of attorney, medical directives for when you're living, right? It's looking at how projecting out. If you're saving this much, what does retirement look like? What number is that, including inflation, right? Then it's taking all that into account and saying this is how you should allocate your money. and then you can go and execute this on your own. Or if you need us to help you execute that there, for additional fee, we can implement the plan. And so for young people, it's important that you get this started correctly, but you don't need someone attaching a 1.5 or 1% investment management fee to the account. So ultimately, that's what we're so passionate about. Is there's so many things around financial planning that people are missing, because advisors just want to collect that asset management fee, but they don't want to do any other work. And that part of our business is going to be commoditized if it's not already.
Interesting there. So I'm trying to understand more from a perspective of, let's say, an airline pilot is, working with an airline. It could be Delta, it could be American, it could be one of the, the majors there. And I believe Delta does a 16% matching, right?
17 now. It's not match. It's a direct contribution.
Direct contribution. Okay. So now, what you set up for this, let's say a pilot, for instance, would this be on a Roth basis, or is it just going to be a traditional 401k linking directly with the company account?
Yes. So that's where financial planning comes in, and how much should be going into Roth and how much should be going into 401k inside the plan. So we determine that. We turn to tax planning as part of the planning process, but we're not directly managing any of the assets. We're simply giving them the allocation. We build them an allocation. In fact, I'm so passionate about it that we track all the major 401k plans. You can go to like pilotretirement.com, which is our pilot landing page. We give out for free the allocations. You don't even have to call me and say, hey, you take a risk questionnaire. It tells you exactly how you should allocate your money. That's a free service that we provide. Just because the value of a financial advisor should never be in the asset allocation. It should be in the overall plan. Are we on track? How's our debt situation? Should we eliminate debt? Right? So many people, not so much the pilots, but a lot of people we meet with say, hey, I want to start investing. I watched, we run a podcast called A Wiser Retirement. They've listened to your podcast. I want to start investing, but they've got $30,000 of credit card debt at 18% interest, right? You gotta clear out the debt first. So there's an order of operation that we go through in the planning process to make sure people are ready to be investing in their future.
Okay, so how should people be? Let's look at it from an average. I have a lot of friends who are in the aviation industry. I myself happen to be in the industry as well. And a lot of them, let's say you're 20, 23, 24-year old, now you're making, because there's some airlines you get started, there's specific qualifications, and you're
Mhm.
making, $400 an hour, right? 400 with some of the regionals, $400 an hour. And that totals up to about $500,000 a year.
Mhm.
As a 23, 24-year-old, I'm like, I've never, because that's more money than most people would make in their late 30s, late 40s, and you're making it in your
Right.
20s. How would someone allocate that? Because I'm still thinking from a perspective of, how do you avoid getting sucked into, yeah, you know what, let me go buy that nice this new BMW X7 that just came out, and let me get that $15,000 a month penthouse. How should someone allocate, especially because it's very hard to
Well,
convince a 20-year-old to save money?
in the pilot life, I would say make sure you keep the first wife, right?
It's funny. It's funny. That is gonna go over a lot of people's heads. But if you're in the industry, I'm gonna say when you know, you know. But yeah, please continue.
So the operation goes like this. One, eliminate debt. So no, you might have a car, you might have a mortgage. So eliminate the debt. The car and mortgage, maybe you carry that for a little bit. I'm okay with that, but make sure the house is paid off before mandatory retirement, which is 65. Okay. The second thing, so that's like creating your solid foundation. The money going out is less than the money coming in, right? The second step is to make sure that you have emergency funds. So it's a great time in the airline industry right now. We're making good money, but you know what? There's this thing called a medical you have to keep. And what happens if you don't have that medical? There's a lot of reasons, medically uh, sensitive reasons why you can't fly, right? So make sure you have a good emergency reserve. If you have to operate on 50% pay, or maybe your airline doesn't have very good disability policy, then you need to have a reserve. So 3 to 6 months of your expenses. I'd say for pilots, we're probably trying to get to the 1 year mark, because you might become healthy, but it's going to take the FAA a good 6 to 8 months to clear you. So let's work on building an emergency reserve fund. After we have that built, are we saving enough for retirement? And those are time value money calculations, trying to guesstimate where you're going to be and if that's going to be enough. That's part of the planning process. After you've completed that, then the next thing is if you have children, college savings. So let's secure higher education for our children. Let's make sure that the income that we're making allows the next generation to be even at a higher level than where we are. Not necessarily income wise, but just in opportunities, right? That's how we keep families improving. And then after we have that, this is the fun part, is we have what we call opportunity funds. And so we know that dollars can slip away. We know that we've checked all the boxes so far. What do we do with opportunity money? Is that we typically put that into a portfolio that's a little more conservative, but it's sitting there for the next opportunity. And I don't know what that could be. That could be a second home that you rent out as a vacation rental. It could be just a second home that you don't rent out. It could be money you live on in retirement between 65 and 75. And you can do Roth conversions with your retirement money during that time period. It can be maybe it's a legacy thing where you take this huge trip with kids and grandkids someday. I don't know. But opportunity money, it could also be your primary home. Maybe you want to upgrade your home, and this is where a large down payment can come from. So that's how we work it with families as we go through planning, is where do the extra dollars go? And that's where a lot of these younger people are calling us going, hey, I'm in a great situation. How do I not screw this up?
Interesting there. So as far as this, if you know the numbers, so what would you say the numbers as far as age ratio from, are people more between the ages of, 21? Is it a high percentage, maybe 20 to 30% more between the ages of the, mid 25 to 35 that are seeking financial advice, as opposed to people more in the closer towards the retirement ages?
Yeah, our average client age is about 58. So they're approaching retirement. They have resources and they're trying to figure out, hey, how do I get this? How do I make this transition? We have a lot of people in their early 30s that are on the opposite spectrum, that are now upgrading to captain, making good money. And then how do we not screw this up? I guess is more the pretext of why they're coming in. So it's really all over the place. All three major airlines here in the US have launched what they call market-based cash balance plan. And so what's happening is the max you can put into a 401k plan this year is $69,000 if you're under the age of 50. And before time you put in your contribution, the company puts in their contribution, by July, you would have filled that up. The IRS doesn't allow you to put any more money in. And so now with the market-based cash balance plan, that overage can now be tax deferred. And so the launch of these market-based cash balance plan really triggered a lot of financial planning over the last year, because pilots are trying to figure out what this means for them. This used to be extra money that would just come to them in their paycheck, but now it's going somewhere else. And so what we do is we model that out and say, okay, well, this is how it changes your retirement by not spending that money now that it goes into the plan. And some people opt out of that, and we show them the difference of being in or out of those plans.
Interesting. So what is the difference? So and also, where does the money go?
It goes into it's not a pension. It's sort of treated like that with the IRS, but it goes into an account that's invested very conservatively. It's 40% stocks, 60% bonds, target rate of returns like 4% per year. And you can't control it. So it goes into the account. If you retire and there's less money in it than what you contributed, in the Delta plan, they'll true it up. So you're guaranteed what you put in. But if obviously you're invested for a long time, it should be fine, right? The benefit of it is that money goes in pre-tax. So if you are making over $400,000 a year and you're in the 37% tax bracket, it's sheltering you from having to pay that income tax until after retirement, where we just roll into an IRA. So that's the benefit of the market-based cash balance plan. You have lack of control, but you have a lot of tax deferral.
Interesting. Okay, so I'm thinking about it from a perspective. I think this was in the early 2000s. There was the U.S. Air. There was the pension. It was what,
Mhm.
55 billion.
Yeah,
Now,
all the pensions are mostly gone. I think FedEx still has a pension, but they don't exist anymore.
okay, now let's say I'm watching this right now, and I know bare minimum about a 401k, bare minimum. But all I know is I don't want my money to be gone. Just the same way, some
Yeah.
way not to happen. So, what's the protection that you have as opposed to the difference between having a 401k and as opposed to being in a traditional pension?
Well, in the traditional pension, your only protection was the U.S. government. So the PBCG would insure your pension. So there are quite a few pilots out there that are be getting money from the Guarantee Corp that protects those pensions that were defaulted on. But the problem is you didn't accrue any more. So if you were saving yourself the entire time, then you came out fine because you had the 401k money and you have this pension, which is still a pretty healthy monthly payment, because it was, if you'd worked long enough at the airline. The benefit of a defined contribution 401k plan is that money that would be going to a pension is now just coming to you, and it's off the company balance sheet. So if the company went out of business, which airlines tend to do, every 2 decades, if the company went out of business, then that money's still yours. It's off their balance sheet. The pension was actually on their balance sheet, but they had to pay the government. It's kind of like an insurance policy. They had to pay the government. So if they defaulted on it, then they would still pay part of it out. It's not the full amount that you would have had if it was still in place. So the 401k is better in that sense. And the market-based cash balance plan is the same thing. It's off the company balance sheet. So it's your money. It just has to sit there until you separate from the company or you're 59 and a half or older.
Okay. Now, okay, this you mentioned a key part there where something about, most airlines usually on average go about two to 3 decades. I mean, we've seen the rise and fall. There was Pan Am, there was what was the other? There was
Eastern.
Eastern. There was, I mean, it's almost like a 2 to 3 decade cycle now. And I'm looking at it from a perspective of, you're a pilot. You're like, yeah, man, I'm gonna be in this airline for 40 years. All
That's
that
the idea.
stuff. And
That's the
it's
idea. Yeah.
that's the idea, but what's the guarantee then if you were a company that, because if you look at most companies' balance sheet, I mean, most airlines operate with a huge amount of debt. They operate on a lot of debt. I mean, the airline business basically is debt. So
Right.
it's so looking at it from that perspective, right? And you're looking at it from a perspective, hey, I am employed by this airline and I have my 401k with this airline. Let's say, God forbid, an airline goes bankrupt or an airline goes belly up, or they're like, hey, there's no merger. What happens to the 401k in that position then?
Oh, it's yours. It's your 401k. You know what? The hardest part about that scenario is not so much the 401k. It's the fact that in the airline business, we operate on this seniority list. So if you're a senior captain making $600,000, $700,000 a year, you have to work overtime to do that. There's no guarantee that pays you that. But if you were making that kind of money, and your airline goes out of business, the hard part is you have to go start over at another airline, but you don't start as a captain. Even though you have all that experience, you have to start as a first officer again at the very bottom of the pay scale and work your way back up. It's not like the plumbers union, where you get credit for years of experience, right?
Mm.
But as far as retirement goes, that money is yours. The company has no claim on that.
Okay, so now which is here is where it's very fascinating because the industry it's a very rewarding industry in a sense. But what do you think? Do you think there's going to be a recession in the next couple of years? Do you think? I mean, because we know we're in election year right now, so I mean, by God, we know there's not going to be any recession, not this year. So,
Well,
I mean,
are you saying they manipulate things? Is that what you're insinuating?
I can't say, or I can't accept it now or say anything in that regard. But we do know that this year everything's going to be perfectly fine. So, what do you think? What do you think? What's your forecast? Do you think in the next, because everyone's preaching recession's coming, recession's coming.
Yeah.
What's your take on this?
So my investment advice is you listen to no one and you invest in long-term healthy asset classes. So you think about the S&P 500 index, if you're invested in one thing, just buy that, right? Because in the end, no one can beat it. You should be more diversified than that. But if you don't know what to do, buy the S&P 500 and then don't sell in a panic. 2023. So at the end of 21, 2022 is going to be just an easy chip shot, right? Just just lay it up there because, we were coming out of COVID. 2022 is going to be the best thing ever. Inflation, there was no inflation, they told us in December. And then we turned the page into January, and oh my gosh, maybe there is inflation. Fed increases interest rates at a rate faster than any time in history. And the markets had to react. Bond market reacted first, and eventually the stock market, and we had a double-digit down year. Well, then they forecasted this deep recession in 23. Oh, we're going to have this deep recession. It's going to be terrible. And what do we have? They think the S&P was up 26% last year in 2023. It's you just have to put earplugs in sometimes, and you have to understand that financial news is almost entertainment today. You're not really getting good advice on CNBC or any of these other channels. They're there more for sensationalism and things like that. And so for me, if you need the money in 5 years, don't invest it. You can get 5% on your cash right now in a money market. So don't invest if you need it in 5 years. If it's for longer than 5 years, then it's going to be fine. You just got to turn all the negativity off and focus on what I call long-term healthy asset classes. Large cap US stocks have always done well. They had bad periods, but typically 7 of 10 years are positive, right? And we get all caught up in this short term, like it's gambling. It's not. Investing is not gambling. There's a famous saying that in the short term, the stock market is a voting machine. It's very volatile, up and down. In the long term, it's a weighing machine, in that the companies that make money prosper. And so that's what we have to focus on is investing in companies that can make money and prosper. That's the bottom line. And how do you do that? Well, unless you're Warren Buffett, you can get an audience with the CEO of the company. You're better off just buying the index funds and keeping your costs very, very low.
Got you. So you're a big proponent of index funds because obviously they're much safer. You're getting a percentage of returns there. Now, what's your take on bonds, on using more of the Treasury bonds? Because
so how you look at I don't want to dodge your question about recession. There is an inverted yield curve which signals a recession. But if you look at when an inverted yield curve happens, that just means that the short-term bonds are paying more money than long-term bonds. That's when the curve gets a little wacky, where really long-term bonds should pay more because there's more risk. Do you want to loan your brother $100 and he pays you back in 10 years or 3 months? Right, the 3-month thing's probably a better.
It's a better safer bet. Yeah.
So there's less risk on the short end, right? So right now that's opposite, which signals a recession. Now, if you go back in history and you say when the inverted yield curve happens, when does the recession happen? It's anywhere from 2 months to 8 years. Right. So that goes back.
That's a huge gap.
It's a huge gap. It goes back to the sensationalism of media, and it's like, we have an inverted yield curve, everybody run for the bunkers. And are we going to be in that bunker for 2 months, or are we going to be in that bunker for 8 years? Because if you're in it for 8 years, you're missing out on a lot of money. Right. So and also too, I will say, if you remember back during the financial crisis, 7, 8, and 9, man, there was panic because the government didn't even know what to do. They had to go. There were no playbooks for this. In the airline business, we have what we call a QRH. It sits there in the cockpit. If you lose an engine, you pull out this QRH book, you open up the book, and you read the list. This is what we do. There was no playbook for a financial meltdown. But you look how fast they reacted to COVID. Look how fast that money came into the economy during COVID time. I mean, it was like less than 30 days. That's because they pulled the playbook that they created in 08 and they used it again and during the crisis. So I kind of wonder can we even have a recession? Is it even possible to have a recession?
But okay, so the reaction in during to the pandemic in 2020, with the stimulus and just the huge influx of cash, I mean, is a huge contributor to the reason why we have, I mean, you go buy groceries. I mean, the average grocery, you go buy groceries right now, you're easily going to spend $300 or $400 on things that would cost $150 about 3.5 years ago. So
you give it's amazing. You give away money, you create more problems. No one says it that way, but that's what happened.
Yeah, but then again, you also look at the fact that I mean, if you look at the bills that are being passed, Congress passed. I mean, they just passed the bill that I mean, it's a $60 billion giveaway basically, and that's just because the way someone explained it to me is basically they are no one's gonna feel it now, but in the next few years, it's basically we are going to have to be one to foot the bill because there's no stop, there's no cap. They can press money they want. So my take on that is the reaction in 2020 is a big contributor to the reason why we have current day events. Would you agree?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. That helped cause a lot of the inflation. What's interesting is though is the jobs. So we have, of course, the textbook recession has already happened. We had 2 quarters of negative GDP, but then we were told, oh no, that's not what a recession is anymore. You have to have 2 negative quarters of GDP and job loss. And the job loss is just not happening. I'm trying to hire 3 positions right now. It is so hard to find qualified people to come work. All my small business owner clients tell me the same thing. We're just trying to find a receptionist right now. We just
Mhm.
like to have a receptionist, and it's really hard to find qualified
Why do you
people.
think that is?
I don't know exactly. I don't have any data on this, but perhaps 10 years ago, we didn't have Grubhub, we didn't have DoorDash, we didn't have Uber or Lyft. And perhaps a lot of people in the service industry are like, hey, I can make the same amount of money on my own time doing these other service jobs. And so those people maybe aren't back in that position. I don't know. I don't know.
Mhm.
But if you look at the unemployment rate, it is persistently low. Um, Tech industry has been having some massive layoffs. Those people are now mostly reemployed somewhere in the industry. So it's looking pretty good. I mean, I was actually out in Telluride about a month and a half ago, and I was checking in at the Delta counter, and I was there about, I don't know, an hour before my flight, and all of a sudden everybody was gone. And I looked around and I was like, where did all the check-in people go? The counter people. Well, they don't have enough people to work out there. So when the airplane arrives, all the counter people have to go outside to unload the airplane. And then they come back inside and continue to check all the people in. And I was like, that's crazy that you can't. I mean, they're off. You go work at Delta, you get free flights anywhere in the world, and they still can't find people to come work.
So with that just basically transitions into the next question, right? Because I mean, the fact that labor is scarce now. I mean, even if you look at the airline world, labor is so scarce that the airlines is paying. They're willing to pay, a
Yeah,
premium for a captain. I mean, you can make. I tell everyone right now, the quickest way for you to make 6 figures is just go get your pilot's license, and straight off the bat, you're already making 6 figures.
as long as you don't
So
get air sick, you're good.
as long as you don't get sick, that's it. As long as you keyword is as long as you don't get sick, you're good. Now, how much of this job, how much of the job, the workforce, the labor, do you think artificial intelligence is going to replace? Because if we're having scarcity, getting
Yeah,
people to fill the counters, maybe you show up to a Delta flight, and then they have just machines like when you go to McDonald's, it's like, hey, enter your flight here, and then it walks your bag, and then it goes all this places.
yeah.
When do you think that? Do you think that's a future we're headed towards?
You know, I look at it more from like a tax planning standpoint. The AI, we're on the tip of the iceberg right now. Um, AI can replace a lot of things. Movie industry being one of them, right? You wouldn't need actors anymore. There was a new launch today. Is it Aurora? I believe.
OpenAI, Sora, the text to
Sora.
video.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, new launch today was Sora, and I was looking on Twitter at some of the things it can produce. It's not perfect, but man, I mean, what a leap forward, right? And this is version 1.
That's true.
Like, holy crap. I look at it partially from a tax efficiency standpoint, in that people say, oh, I need to convert my money into Roth now, and I'm going to pay the 37% or the 24% in tax. And I say, I would be cautious about that, because I don't know that we're guaranteed to have higher tax rates in the future. I know that the debt's increasing, and the only way to stop the debt from increasing is to stop politicians from spending. And the only way you can stop spending typically is by not giving them more money. You can't say, here's more money, don't spend it. So I think the solution there is probably keeping tax about where it is. But I think the government would actually get more income in the future simply because of the efficiencies from AI. So, for example, if right now, if I want to create this process, I could create a process where uh, using Chat GPT overlaid with a financial AI, overlaid with another AI that understands me, I could upload all the investment options in a 401k plan and say, build me a 401k plan, focus on index funds using modern portfolio theory, focus on long-term investing philosophy of wiser wealth management. And within a few minutes, it would generate it on a PDF, give it to me to review, and I could forward that to a client and say, hey, use this allocation. That literally eliminates a job here because we have one person who does a lot of research for us, mostly in that area. So it's definitely something that's coming. Um, you look at the Nvidia, right? The price of that stock. What was it, Nvidia, just a few years ago? I think it was $110 a share.
Yeah,
And
now it's off the roof for
yeah,
sure.
and now they announced that they're going to be making custom chips for Google and Apple and so there's just like it's like endless possibilities, right? Now, where sometimes it comes down to trust, though. Do people want to go sit in an airplane and it flies itself with no human interaction? I don't think so. I think Alaska is a good reminder of that. That just because AI can fly the airplane doesn't mean that it knows how to handle poor manufacturing, right?
There was a saying that someone says what one generation tolerates another generation would accept. Just so let's imagine 30, 40 years from now you grew up in cell phones, technology, iPads, AI. Your doctor is a robot, everything's a robot, and then you get into an airplane. Maybe the previous generation is like, no, I'm not going to do this, we're not going to get into this. But if that's all you grew up seeing was only robot pilots, and then you get in there and then you see a
Yeah,
human, you're like, wait, why is there a human in there? So I think it's also a generational thing. I think they say what it takes 20 years to re-educate a generation. So
yeah.
I don't think
But
AI will necessarily.
wouldn't they start with something like trains? Like Amtrak. Do they drive around with no conductors? I don't think so.
Well, the thing, here's, I think we're looking at it from a perspective of economically, we're looking at it from a perspective of, okay, as a society, we evolve together, right? So in
Yeah,
that sense, the train makes sense. But I'm looking at it from a monetary perspective. If the airlines are struggling to get pilots, right? I mean, now they're doing,
yeah,
programs where they hire from overseas. But if they're struggling, because we saw that they tried to lobby Congress to reduce the minimums from 1,500 to 750. So
yeah,
I'm saying in the next 30 to 40 years, maybe another airline comes out, because I mean we see, I mean this every 20 years is a new one.
yeah,
So in the next 40 years, maybe one comes out and says, hey, we have one pilot in here, we have a drone pilot backup, and we also have an AI that's satellite based, so there is no interference. But I wouldn't, because the reality, the thing is, if you had asked me, or I had asked you 5 years ago that you could text an AI and it will make a video that looks very human like, you would
right.
say, God, what are you talking about? But now we're like, whoa. And then in the next
Yeah,
5 years, it's just going to be another thing of the past. So I think I wouldn't put it past there. But I want to talk about something which is, you mentioned, you touched up a little bit, was I think the US has what, 34 trillion in debt, right? We're 34 trillion in debt as of now. And I personally think they don't care. At this point, they don't care. It's just like, hey, print more money. I mean, hey, who
no,
cares?
I mean, the bottom line is if you control your own currency, you can not care for a really long time. But there is a point. Is there a point at which, if you can't control that currency well, your debt payments are going to get really, really high, really, really fast.
Mm,
So I think it's around, you know, this number changes so fast, but it's like most of the revenue at this point that we're generating as a country goes to pay those debt payments, especially
mm,
at these new higher interest rates. People love to hate Donald Trump, but one thing I'll bring up is that when interest rates were at zero, one of the things that he said was, "It's time to refinance our debt into a 100-year bond," and it would
mm.
have been at 1%. And you think, you go back now and where we are in interest rates, you go, that's actually pretty genius. If we could have
Now,
refinanced all the
if
debt at
if
1%.
I mean, the interest rate payments right now, it's all 1 trillion, just 1 trillion, I think
Yeah,
goes just.
it's a big number. It's a big number. There's going to be a generation at some point that will have to deal with it. This is something that I kind of deal with on a weekly basis is that we have a pretty conservative client base, and they get a lot of their news now from these third party websites that, again, are sensationalism and entertainment and clickbaity, right? And
True.
so it's like, either last week someone called in and said, hey, the US dollar is not going to be king of the world anymore, because Russia's now trading in the Chinese currency. And I'm like, well, yes, that happened. Um, I think it was more of a kind of an FU to the US, and that's why they did it, because of the sanctions. It was a very small trade. There's no indication that that trade is continuing to happen. And if they did trade in the Chinese currency, what is the Chinese currency stabilized to? The US dollar.
Mm,
That's why China buys so much of it. It's all connected, right? It's so now that doesn't mean it'll be like that forever, but the news article doesn't talk about that. And so you have to take these half truths and you have to be able to combine them into what is truth. And that's the problem today, is that there's not a real solid financial media source that understands all this. And even in my own podcast, I want to do a whole podcast just about what I just said right there. But
mm.
I go to universities and I say, okay, who's an expert on this? I want to interview the expert. And there's just not. It's a very complicated subject. But into like gold. Oh my gosh, like these late night TV stuff. They'll scare you to death. Inflation's going through the roof. You got to put all your money in gold. That was a terrible investment. Gold's a terrible investment. Why would you buy
Yeah.
gold?
You,
You pay.
you know, and then yeah, and you know what's interesting, because you said gold's a terrible, and I think there's a lot of bad actors out there. There's a lot of people giving advice that should not be given advice because there's a monetary gain. Because I could say gold is a good investment and then go buy gold from ABC company that sells gold, but you don't know that when you click on a link to buy, it's an affiliate link, so I get a 10 to 20% from everything you buy. So technically, you are buying the gold, and I'm telling it's a good investment, but I'm making 20% off of it. And people pushing gold, silver, art, and at this point in time, anyone can push anything as long as there's a. We got
Right.
approached recently by a betting company, and they were like, "Hey, we would like you to promote our stuff for decent amount." And I'm like, I mean, at first it's a good amount, but then again, it's also kind of a perspective where I don't think I can live with myself saying, "Hey, go bet this," where I personally would. I personally, you would never catch me gambling. That's one thing, you would never catch me in that, because
Right.
it's just odds I can't predict. And which is interesting, and I really wanted to get your take on this. So recently someone asked me a question. He said, it's another pilot. He goes, man, I same thing. He's consuming the news, and it's like, hey, something might happen, what do you think is a good side hustle, right? What's a good side hustle?
Yeah.
What do you because most side hustles end up costing. Someone said your side hustle will become your full-time problem. So, so
Right.
what do you think about? Because I'm a big believer. Just pick one thing, stick to it. If it doesn't work, jump. If you have a plan B, you're not giving all your attention to plan A.
Yeah. So one of the criticisms of me when I was a pilot was that you can't serve two masters. It's really hard to serve the airline and your clients at the exact same time. Now, I wasn't making that much money because I dropped every trip I could drop. So I found every excuse not to go into work as an airline pilot, because you kind of work that system. But I really started in 2014 when I walked away. That's when the wires were really started growing. In fact, since 2014, we've grown 20% at least every single year since 2014. And it takes a lot of effort to do that. I have a great team that surrounds me, which makes this very easy at times. But if you're looking for something to do on the side that generates income, the pilots that I've seen successful in real estate as an agent, usually with a wife or a spouse that's helping out. So when they're on trips, someone can show houses for them, things like that. I've seen some pilots do other things, like I know a guy that has a fencing company, so he just sells fencing. At the regional level, I saw a lot of people doing things on the side. I know a guy that did like a small repair engine shop. So he was an A&P mechanic, but he'd work on lawnmowers and blowers, weed eaters, things like that. As pilots, transition to where they are today, I don't see too many side hustles. Most of it's about family time and legacy and helping kids. But if someone's looking for a side hustle, it's probably going to be in the service business unless they have a family business already that they're participating in.
Interesting. So you wouldn't because there's a huge advocate where, and a lot of people mention real estate, but I don't think because we can always talk about the good side, like, hey, get into real estate. But if you have a real estate in New York and your tenants aren't paying and you can't evict them, I mean,
Yeah.
so
I'm not well, real estate's local, right? So the real estate market is wherever you are could be different from somewhere else across the country. If everyone's moving to Atlanta, someone's moving from somewhere, and that somewhere is probably not doing real well, right?
mm,
So it's like Detroit, it's like Atlanta got hit pretty hard in the financial crisis, but Detroit got hit really hard, and you could buy a really cheap house there in 08 and 09. But you know, my version of real estate today is not buying the slumlord house where you're buying the house and then you're renting it out, and the market doesn't pay and you have to boot them out. It's hard to do that these days, actually, to boot somebody out. But I would focus on what I would call it kind of a legacy real estate, where you're buying a piece of property that you want to vacation at with your family, your kids, someday your grandkids, and there's fond memories there. But every day's not a vacation day, right? You're there maybe a couple months out of the year, and then you put it into a rental program for the rest of the time. So then that property can generate income to hopefully cover its costs and pay for itself. So we've seen that. I have a lot of pilots who have attempted that, meaning they bought the house and then when they got there, they're like, I don't want to rent this out. And so they've never rented it out in the end. But the idea was that you could rent it out. And then you have price appreciation, because typically lake, mountains, and beach are going to hold their value pretty well. Even during 08, there were segments that held up really well, which are probably unattainable to most pilots right now because the price appreciation.
I mean, would you
But
even say now is a because I mean interest rates right now sitting at 7%. I mean, there's the Feds. I mean, didn't Jerome Powell said he wasn't gonna they were gonna lower the rates another but 0.5%.
they might go up another 0.25%, but now everyone else is talking about a rate cut by year end, and I don't know. The Fed typically always overreacts to one side or the other. So if they raise rates one more time, the market's not going to like that. That could be a buying opportunity for sure. But everything right now points toward a lower interest rate at the end of the year. I interview a real estate expert about once a quarter on my podcast, and Tom thinks that we're never going to see a 3% interest rate again. It's going to be something around 5.25%, 5% on a 30-year.
You think so? So it's gonna 5. I mean, which
We're
by the
we're at
way,
7 now, right? So
yeah,
7.5. So that's a pretty big drop. The only problem is how I see it is, if you go from 7 to 5, people are going to see that as an opportunity, and you're going to have real estate prices spiking again. So I say you may have to put down more money today to get a reasonable payment, but I would not buy a house because you have a 7 to 7.5% 30-year rate. If you can afford it, I'd say you go ahead and buy it. And if the rates drop, you refinance. Because if the rates come down enough, they're going to be buyers, and you're going to have the price wars again. Because why? We still have the jobs.
that's true. Yeah, I mean, yeah, we still do for and which is a side note. I think the refinance market in the next 5 years, when the rates drop, is going to be through the roof, because everyone is just prepping for the rates to go below what they're currently
Right.
paying to
Right.
go ahead and refi.
Or we have clients who want to move, but they're sitting on 1.9 to 2.25% 15-year mortgages right now. And they don't want to go from that to 7.25, right?
Hmm.
So they're like, you know what? We'll just stay here and just improve the place, but we're not going to go anywhere. So there's a lot of there's just lack of inventory because of that. And then you have people that are just moving out of dire situations like California, where the tax rates are going through the roof, and yet they still can't balance their budget. And so people are moving out, and it's still cheaper to pay 7.25 somewhere else than live in that environment.
Yeah, I mean the income tax is what 13%. I mean, you look at the property value. I mean, it's just and then I mean, we could have a long, lengthy conversation about California and how it's. I used to be a big fan of California, San Diego, San Francisco. But I mean, you go there now. I mean, I'm not saying bad about some people still love the state, but if you live
Yeah.
in the rich, very very wealthy parts of the suburbs and you're away from everything, I think it's a great state. But if you look at everywhere else, it's been. I mean, California right now is not what it used to be 5, 7, 8 years ago.
No,
But
it's a learning curve of politicians, and they had ideals that maybe look good on paper, but when they actually implemented it, um, didn't work out so well. It turns out that people need to have consequences for actions. And yeah, I was at the Charles Schwab conference in Philly this last year, and about I don't know 2 weeks before I got there, the Target was raided. They went in and these people in the community raided their own Target, but there
no.
were no consequences because everything they stole was under $500.
Yeah, because the California law is anything under 1,000 is not prosecuted.
Yeah. So in Philly, anything under $500.
Oh
So
no.
so they couldn't do anything. You could arrest them, but they're not going to get prosecuted. Now I'm sure the people who broke the glass and all that, I don't know, maybe the glass is less than $500. I don't know, but it's Target. So Target announced they were pulling out. They were going to close that store,
Wow.
and I don't blame them. I don't blame them, and I think more of that's going to have to happen where you have people, companies decide it's too risky to do business here, to have our product stolen, no consequences. They can just keep raiding our stores. I went to that Target. Everything was locked down. If you wanted to buy almost anything of value, you had to have it unlocked.
I didn't think there was going to be a coming time in America where we live in a land of the free, where you'd be like, hey, it's I mean, there's I mean, we could, like I said, we could have
Yeah,
a whole
I
lengthy discussion
I
about
kind of wonder about New York too. I think it would
well,
take a lot for people to leave, for big businesses to leave headquarters in New York, because they have a lot vested in those big towers, obviously, if they own the real estate. But you think of some of the prosecutions that have happened there recently, overstating values of properties. Like the value of a
uh-huh.
property is very hard to state because it takes a buyer and a seller to agree on the price. And so you
Uh-huh.
can value anything you want until you want to liquidate it. But if they're going to say, hey, you misrepresented the value of this property, and then the court gets to decide. I mean, the worst people in the world at math are attorneys, unless they're billing. They're really good at billing. But outside of that, I've never met an attorney that can do math. Honestly, I haven't. I've worked with a lot of attorneys, and they're always asking us to do the math because they can't do it. And so now an attorney, a prosecutor is going to decide what the value of something is. It just blows my
Yeah,
mind.
I think it's only. I mean, there's a few. It might take a lot for New Yorkers to move, but I think because New York, the top the wealthiest brackets of New York are starting to move to Florida. To no income tax. I mean, you
Yes.
go to Florida, Tennessee,
Yeah.
Texas, states where because people might say, I think what New York is what
I
11.
think Utah is part of that too, because every person I've ever met in Park City was from New York.
Yeah, so people, I mean, people are starting to see. I mean, especially when you make the policies. I mean, I think in the next 5, 10 years, the population, especially in the city of New York. I mean, most firms are going to have to. They're going to have to move. I mean, you go to a state where they actually want you to be there.
Right.
Versus a state where you're punished for the more money you make, the more it's like, yeah, you need. It's just the greed just sets in, and then it's like, why stay there? you know I mean,
Right.
but we can go on. I think we need to set up a part two for that. But as we wrap up here, guys, where can people find you? I mean, because I personally, I love the background, especially in the aviation side. I love the fact that you did the transition from being from ASA back in what year did you leave the because ASA was 2014.
Yeah. No. Yeah. I was ASA from 2004 to 2014, and then I was at Colgan Air from 2002 to 2004. That's where I kind of cut my teeth in the business.
Yeah, Kogan. That's a name. That's a name I've not heard anyone say in a very,
That
very long time.
it was an interesting experience. I survived Colgan because I'd always worked in small businesses, and if you're going to sit there and you're going to curse out the crew scheduler, you got to realize that the crew scheduler probably sitting at the same Thanksgiving table as Senator Colgan, who owned Colgan Air. And so I was able to kind of navigate through. It's a non-union shop. You upgraded based on merit.
Ah,
They unfortunately, when I was there, they crashed an airplane out of Hyannisport, I believe, because they installed the trim actuator upside down. And for those of you who are listening who don't understand this, but at the very top of the elevator that moves their nose up and down on the airplane, there's a trim actuator, and it has a little tab on it, like a white little tab. And it would have been way off of where it normally would be, but you would never really notice that as a pilot. Like you just wouldn't. That's just not something that you would that much detail would go into a pre-flight to see that the trim actuator was upside down. Why would a trim actuator ever be upside down, right? And so basically they took off and they flew for, I don't know how long, 10, 12 seconds or something. They crashed into the small bay there. The captain was an accounting background. I think he went to Ohio State. It was a really sad time. I was actually departing out of Boston, and on the emergency frequency heard the ELT transmitter going off, which you assume there was some airplane in a hangar somewhere and someone flipped a switch. It's kind of annoying to hear it. It's very loud.
yeah,
And after that happened, and they blamed it on the pilots. Even the NTSB took that track with them. That was the pilot's fault. They should have done a better job at pre-flighting. I was like, it's time to move out of here a little faster. And I interviewed at an airline called Comair, which was owned by Delta at the time. They didn't like me, and I'll tell you, everything happens for a reason. And that airline
yeah.
was out of business a few years after I did that interview. So I came home back to the South, and we all spoke the same language, and had a good career there. But it's you can find us at wiserinvestor.com, and on our website we have lots of different white papers you can download. You can, if you're in the airline industry, you can get to the airline section by clicking on the airline tab in the middle of the website. We also have our own podcast, A Wiser Retirement. It's available anywhere you listen to podcasts. We have a YouTube channel also called A Wiser Retirement as well, which we do some bonus features to the podcast there. You can schedule an appointment anytime if you're in the industry and you're one of the airlines that we monitor the 401k plans. You can download free allocations there as well.
Interesting. So what are the so can you just list out, because a lot, not everyone is adept to, most people just, I mean, TikTok has made everyone a 3 second, they want to let, give me the, what airlines do so we have Delta, I'm assuming Delta
So yeah,
subsidiaries.
Delta. So it's kind of where the ASA people gravitated to after they left the airline. So Delta, obviously, we're in Atlanta, so the Delta and Southwest are some of our largest client bases. But supporting that would be second in line, or third in line would be United, American. We follow the plan for Alaska Airlines. We have quite a few clients that fly for Alaska. Coletta, which is a cargo carrier, we track that as well. And FedEx is another one that we have clients at. And then Spirit and Atlas, I believe, are also on the list, which we have a lot of people at Spirit and Atlas. Atlas, no one really knows Atlas, but it's a cargo carrier. If you order anything on Amazon, it's probably come through an Atlas airplane, if I had to guess.
Yeah, I mean, Atlas has because I think most of the cargoes are starting to, because I think Amazon is wrecking, traditional cargo, carriers, because almost everyone right now is kind of jumping on board with Amazon, because I mean, in forecast 10, 15 years, I think Amazon is going to dominate the cargo space. I think FedEx might even sign a contract to deliver just for Amazon. So,
if you talk to a FedEx pilot right now, they're scared to death because they're looking at half empty airplanes, and they think the economy is just about to tank. Now, to put it in perspective, their loads are back to 2019, so this kind of returned to normal in this post COVID world, right? So I don't share their thoughts that the whole world's falling apart. And then the Coletta guys, they've seen a reduction in their flying as well in cargo, and that's just because we're not shipping masks and all this other stuff that we've been shipping for a few years. We're kind of beyond all this now. But needless to say, they're not so much Coletta, but FedEx is trying to use the opportunity to offload pilots. And so they wrote a letter to the pilots saying they made a special deal with PSA. Now, PSA is a regional carrier for American. And so a FedEx pilot can leave FedEx, go to PSA with a $200,000 signing bonus and fly for PSA. They'll probably never make over 200,000 the whole time they're at PSA. And then eventually they'd flow into American, which I took a snapshot of that. I think I put that on my LinkedIn. I thought that was hilarious because I'm like, that's the opposite of how the rest of the world's going right now. Right. And
that
they're
is
just
that is
trying
the
to
opposite.
use this opportunity to scare their pilots off the payrolls, which is kind of interesting.
But which is interesting because there's a lot of people that I from sources, there's a lot of people that are taking that offer because it's a 250,000 sign-on bonus of which you tax and all that stuff. But I think they also negotiate a rate with the airline as well for starting out at a very, I wouldn't say crazy amount, but
I
competitive.
don't understand why you would do that. Why not just go to Delta American? If you want to go
True.
to the strongest financial airline, you just skip the line. You just go right to Delta. Delta's, you're gonna get that interview. You'll probably get hired, unless you're
Mhm.
unless there's something wrong with you. But you'll go to you'll get well. There's a lot of weird people in this business. I mean, you just be honest. There's pilots are kind of a strange group, and I'm one of them. But we're it's a fraternity for sure. But yeah, we have some guys that do strange things. I have all kinds of stories of just the crews I flew with over the years. That could be a whole nother podcast series. But
I think we have a lineup for follow because this is going to be it's going to be technically a Netflix sequel for series here. So we've got the talk about California politics, talk about the politics because I definitely want to have you on with the pod stories. But I think I'm going to have on because you're what part of Georgia?
we're in Atlanta, so just
Okay.
north of Atlanta, Marietta, Georgia.
Okay, man. Yeah, I mean, I mean, honestly, I would say outside of the drive-in in Atlanta, because the drive-in in Atlanta it's
It's
a beast
horrible.
of its own.
I live
It's
2 miles. I live 3.1 miles from the office, so I have eliminated the drive.
good. I mean, that's great because we had to do that drive not too long ago, and I would say, yeah, no, it's basically just be prepared for war because people would just stop in front of you in the middle of a highway, like why, like
Yeah,
why you? It's
yeah.
it's an insane. But no, I was thinking maybe in the future, guys, we're gonna have some put some podcasts. There's a few people that I think I honestly want to have a FedEx pilot that did the transition into the regional side again, go back and just kind of have that would be definitely an interesting conversation. So definitely, guys, stay tuned for that. Casey's been great having you on. Guys, the links to work with Casey, to listen to his podcast, to subscribe to his channel, it's going to be in the description. So if you listen on YouTube, go ahead, click on the description box. If you are on Spotify right now, definitely go ahead and click the description box as well. Definitely go show some love to Casey's podcast. Casey's been an absolute pleasure having you on here, and look forward to the series to come because definitely it's going to be fire more content to come up. Thanks again, guys, for everyone being on, and everyone, like I say, bye-bye.